Ever thought about spending 40 days exiled on a mysterious island, facing a grim choice between life and death? Welcome to Poveglia Island, a forsaken place where even the strongest rarely survived. Centuries ago, during the Black Death, it became a dumping ground for all the diseased, a place of unimaginable suffering. Back in the day when Venice was bustling with trade but dealing with the scary Black Death, Poveglia Island was there, reminding everyone of how tough life could be. This little triangle of land in the South Lagoon got a reputation for being the scariest place around. It was where they dumped people sick with diseases that no doctors could help with. Just imagine being stuck there knowing you probably wouldn't make it out alive, with nothing but spooky whispers in the air. Poveglia Island saw a lot of suffering over the years, and the folks who survived said it was like being in a living nightmare. Even in all that darkness, something is intriguing about the place. The mystery of what really went down there. Poveglia Island's story dates way back to AD 421 when the first settlers arrived. Romans looking for safety from the invading Goths and Huns. Can you imagine? Men, women and kids are seeking refuge from all the chaos. But this island had something special. Its location made it super hard for those barbarian invaders to attack. So for almost a millennium, Poveglia was like a haven from all the craziness happening on the mainland. Those attackers probably thought that it was not worth the hassle and moved on. Over the centuries, Poveglia Island thrived, sheltered from mainland laws and taxes. Meanwhile, Venice emerged as a powerhouse, dominating European trade by the 14th century. While the island remained secluded, Venice flourished as the epicenter of international commerce. A fortress was built to guard the entrance to the Venetian Lagoon, repelling enemy ships and safeguarding the island's trade. But even with all that protection, something sneaky managed to slip through: the bubonic plague. This disease would go on to ravage Europe, claiming the lives of millions. This disease, carried by fleas living on rats, had been causing trouble in ancient Greece and Rome for a while. But then in the 14th century, ships coming from the Crimea brought in a whole new batch of trouble. This sparked the deadliest pandemic in history, hitting European shores very hard. In 1348, this nightmare of a disease made its way to Venice, and let us tell you, it was devastating. Half of the city's population was wiped out. People started getting these nasty black pimples all over their bodies, and before they knew it, they were gone in just 3 days. Things got bad really fast. Bodies were piling up so fast that there weren't even enough people left alive to bury them. Houses started stinking to high heaven because there were just dead bodies lying around, forgotten. It was chaos. People were freaking out and the city was falling apart. They even had to make laws to stop folks from leaving because it was getting that bad. But when even the elite started dropping like this, they knew they had to do something. That's when they came up with this idea: a quarantine zone. It was like the first ever attempt at keeping the sick folk separate to stop the disease from spreading. They picked Poveglia Island for this experiment in 1423. They built these big communal buildings, called lazaretti, to stick all the plague victims in. But these quarantine spots were a mess. They were dirty, smelly, and had terrible ventilation. And even the doctors back then didn't even know how the disease was spreading, so it was just chaos. It was just like a one-way ticket to death. They'd ship boatloads of sick folks, even kids, to this place, and let us tell you, it was a living nightmare. Around 160,000 people, too weak to fight back, got sent there, and it was just awful. The island's heart was this big crematorium that burned heaps of bodies on these giant funeral pyres. They even brought the bodies of Venetian citizens who died on the mainland to burn there. It was like hell on earth. Archaeologists say that about half the soil on the island today is actually the ashes of all those poor souls who were cremated there. Once the epidemic was over, people started moving back in, but then in 1379, the War of Chioggia happened, and they built a new fort for defense. The people still living there had to bail out to Venice, and Poveglia Island turned into a full-blown battlefield. After 3 long years of fighting, the place was wrecked. All those homes and buildings, gone. Only a handful of people managed to come back after all that chaos. Then again, history was stuck on repeat. In 1485, another plague hit Venice hard. This time, even the elites weren't safe. Even the Venetian head of state caught it. They brought back the quarantine idea, but it wasn't much help. They packed sick people into buildings like way too many in one room. The Black Death again made a comeback in 1630, hitting even harder than before. If you so much as sneezed, they'd kick you out of Venice, sometimes literally, and send you off to isolation for a whole 40 days. Most of them never saw the light of Venice again. Medical science was like nothing against this thing. Doctors weren't even trying to cure anyone, they were just tallying up the death toll. Doctors back then had a pretty grim side hustle. They'd do the odd autopsy and listen in on someone's last wishes. But get this, some of them were straight up crooks, swiping stuff from the dead. Doctors back then had some fascinating gear, hazmat suits, but with a medieval style. Their masks were quite peculiar, which included a long beak filled with mint and cloves. They believed it would shield them from the foul odours and the plague itself. They wore a black cloak all soot-covered to shield themselves from contamination and a black hat to signify they were the doctors. Plus, they'd carry around these long wooden sticks. Now, that was also their defense against attacks. Can you imagine patients asking for a whipping, believing it would cure them? They used to think their sins were making them sick. Back then, they had some pretty intense methods for treating the sick. Can you believe they actually thought covering those painful buboes with human waste would help? And pouring mercury on them. Crazy, right? It's hard to imagine what they were thinking, but things got a bit more organised over time. By 1777, Poveglia was being used as a clearing station for plague victims, and in 1793, they set up a proper quarantine spot. Sailors from all over had to stop by for inspection before heading into Venice itself. With its grim history, tales of hauntings began to spread around Poveglia in the early 1800s. It gained the name the Island of Ghosts. Napoleon Bonaparte saw an opportunity in its spooky reputation and strategic location, using it to store weapons and gunpowder. It became a place few dared to go. Napoleon's influence on Poveglia didn't end there. He ordered the destruction of a 12th century church, turning its bell tower into a lighthouse. But when his weapon caches were discovered, the island witnessed further turmoil and battles. Eventually, the plague subsided, leading to a disturbing transformation. Poveglia became a mental asylum. The conditions were appalling, as the buildings were repurposed from places of death to house the mentally ill, lacking the necessary facilities for their care. In 1922, they opened an official mental hospital on the island. You can still see the decaying sign at the entrance today. By then, Poveglia had already gained its chilling reputation. People whispered all sorts of stories about the asylum. Patients talked about hearing terrifying screams at night, believed to be the tortured souls of plague victims from centuries ago. In the 1930s, some chilling tales emerged about a doctor at the facility conducting disturbing experiments on patients. He was said to be performing lobotomies using crude tools and pieces of strange mechanical devices scattered around the complex. According to a nurse who claimed to have seen it, the doctor eventually lost his mind and tragically leaped off the church's bell tower. After its closure in 1960, Poveglia Island lay abandoned until a brief attempt in the 1960s to transform it into a geriatric centre. However, this initiative failed, and subsequent efforts to rebuild the hospital met mysterious halts. The island's mysterious history persisted, with locals claiming to hear distant church chimes even though the bell tower had been removed. Workers have been scared off by rumours of dark spirits, and since 2014, Venice has been trying to sell Poveglia to private owners without any takers. Visitors are now completely banned from the island, where structures sit abandoned amidst piles of debris, rusting equipment, and decaying furniture. Fishermen avoid the area altogether, and water taxis refuse to transport visitors there. While a few investigators were granted access to explore the ruins, some returned with chilling reports of strange odours, disembodied screams, and mysterious footsteps, adding to the island's haunting reputation. A sense of evil is still present, leaving Poveglia in mystery and rendering it off-limits even today. How do you feel about the rumours of dark spirits haunting the island? Do share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. Until next time, stay curious, and we'll be back with another one.